The Carter family estate was a masterpiece of grandeur, with its towering columns and sprawling gardens. But tonight, the air inside was suffocating. Ethan Carter sat at the long mahogany dining table, his plate untouched. Across from him, his father, Morgan Carter, sipped his wine with calculated calm, while his mother, Paula, adjusted her pearl necklace, her expression unreadable. "Ethan," Morgan began, his voice steady but firm, "it's time for you to step up and take responsibility for this family." Ethan's brow furrowed. He had heard this tone before, calm, authoritative, and always followed by something he wouldn't like. "What exactly does that mean?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Paula leaned forward, her smile tight and rehearsed. "It means we've found the perfect match for you. Rosalind Wilder. She's everything this family needs." Ethan blinked, his stomach twisting. "Rosalind Wilder?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly. She's twice my age." "She's 42, Morgan corrected sharply, his tone brooking no argument. "And she's the daughter of one of the most influential shipping magnates in the country. A marriage to her would secure partnerships that could expand our business globally." Ethan pushed back in his chair, his heart pounding. "You want me to marry someone I barely know, someone I don't love, just to benefit the company?" Paula reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Ethan, darling, this isn't just about the company. It's about legacy, about ensuring the Carter name remains untouchable." Ethan pulled his arm away, his voice trembling with anger. "No, this is about control, about you and Dad dictating every aspect of my life. I'm not a pawn in your business deals." Morgan's fist slammed onto the table, making the silverware rattle. "Enough!" he barked. "You've lived a privileged life, Ethan. Everything you have is because of this family, and now it's time to give back. If you refuse, you'll be on your own. No money, no support, nothing." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He stared at his father, his chest heaving. "So that's it?" he said, his voice low but filled with pain. "Either I obey or I'm discarded like I mean nothing to you?" Morgan didn't flinch. "You have until the end of the week to decide." Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't need a week," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I'm done." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving his parents in stunned silence. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, Ethan felt a strange mix of fear and relief. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay. Ethan drove aimlessly through the city streets, the glow of streetlights blurring as his thoughts spiraled. His father's words echoed in his mind. "You'll be on your own, no money, no support." For most of his life, Ethan had been the perfect son. He attended the best schools, followed the career path his parents laid out for him, and played the role of the dutiful heir to the Carter shipping empire. But tonight, something inside him snapped. He couldn't live like this anymore, trapped in a gilded cage, his every move dictated by his parents' ambitions. He pulled over to the side of the road, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The weight of his decision pressed down on him. If he walked away, he would lose everything: the family fortune, the connections, the life of comfort he had always known. But if he stayed, he would lose himself. Ethan leaned back in his seat, staring up at the night sky through the windshield. The stars were faint, barely visible against the city's light pollution. He thought about his childhood, back when life felt simpler. Summers spent at the beach, the salty breeze in his hair, the sound of waves crashing against the shore. Those were the only times he ever felt truly free. A memory surfaced: Seabrook Bay. It was the small coastal town his family used to visit when he was a boy. His parents hadn't been back in years, but Ethan remembered it vividly. The quiet streets, the friendly locals, the endless stretch of ocean. It was the kind of place where no one cared about last names or business deals. Without thinking, Ethan started the car and pulled back onto the road. He didn't have a plan, but he knew where he needed to go. The drive to Seabrook Bay was long, and by the time Ethan arrived, The first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. The town was just as he remembered it, quaint and unassuming, with wooden houses lining the streets and fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. Ethan parked his car near the beach and stepped out, the cool morning air hitting his face. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe. He wandered through the town, his footsteps echoing on the cobblestone streets. Most of the shops were still closed, but one caught his eye, a small bakery cafe with a hand-painted sign that read, Seabrook Sweets. The smell of fresh bread and coffee wafted through the air, drawing him in. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. Shelves lined with jars of homemade jams and pastries filled the display case. Behind the counter stood a young woman, her auburn hair tied back in a loose braid. She was wiping down the counter, humming softly to herself. Ethan hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The bell above the door jingled, and the woman looked up, her hazel eyes meeting his. "Good morning," she said with a friendly smile. "You're up early. What can I get for you?" Ethan paused, suddenly unsure of what to say. He hadn't planned on stopping here, let alone talking to anyone. Just coffee," he said finally, his voice a little hoarse. "Coming right up," she replied, turning to the coffee machine. As she worked, Ethan took in the cozy surroundings. The walls were adorned with photos of the town, and a chalkboard menu listed the day's specials in neat handwriting. It was a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environments he was used to. "Here you go," the woman said, placing a steaming cup of coffee on the counter. "First time in Seabrook Bay?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I've been here before. A long time ago." She tilted her head, studying him curiously. "Well, welcome back. I'm Sarah, by the way." "Ethan," he said, offering a small smile. "Nice to meet you, Ethan," Sarah said warmly. "If you're looking for a quiet place to clear your head, you've come to the right town." Ethan nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a flicker of peace. The sun was higher in the sky now, casting a golden glow over Seabrook Bay. Ethan sat at a small table by the window in Seabrook Suites, his coffee growing cold as he stared out at the quiet street. The town was waking up slowly, shopkeepers unlocking their doors, a few locals strolling by with their dogs. It was a world away from the chaos he had left behind. Sarah moved around the cafe with practiced ease, refilling the sugar jars and arranging fresh pastries in the display case. Ethan couldn't help but notice the way she carried herself, calm, confident, and completely at home in her surroundings. "Need a refill?" she asked, breaking his thoughts. Ethan looked up, startled. Sure, thanks." She smiled and took his cup, returning a moment later with fresh coffee. "You've got that look," she said, setting the cup down in front of him. "What look?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "The I'm running from something look," she said matter-of-factly, leaning against the counter. Ethan froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. Was he that obvious? "Is it that easy to tell?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. Sarah shrugged. "I've seen it before. People come to Seabrook Bay for all kinds of reasons. Some are just passing through, but others, well, they're looking for a fresh start." Ethan studied her, wondering how much she could see through him. "And which one are you?" he asked. Her smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "I'm the one who stayed," she said simply. Before he could ask more, the door jingled and a teenage girl burst in, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Sarah, I'm late for school." Sarah turned, her expression softening. "Lily, you're always late for school," she said with a laugh. The girl Lily rolled her eyes but grinned. "I forgot my lunch. Again." Sarah reached behind the counter and grabbed a brown paper bag, handing it to her. "Here, now go or you'll miss the bus." "Thanks, you're the best," Lily called over her shoulder as she dashed out the door. Ethan watched the exchange, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Your sister?" he asked. "Yeah," Sarah said, her tone shifting to something softer. "She's 16, keeps me on my toes, but she's a good kid." Ethan nodded, sensing there was more to the story but not wanting to pry. "You're close." "We have to be," Sarah said, her voice quieter now. "It's just the two of us." Ethan hesitated, unsure if he should ask the question on his mind. "What about your parents?" Sarah's expression darkened for a moment, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "They're gone," she said simply, turning back to the counter. "It's been a few years now." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice sincere. Sarah glanced at him, her eyes softening. "Thanks, but we're doing okay. Lily's my priority now." Ethan nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. Here he was, running from his problems, while Sarah was facing hers head-on. As the morning wore on, the cafe grew busier, and Sarah moved from table to table, chatting with customers and taking orders. Ethan stayed in his corner, watching her work. There was something about her, something steady and grounded that made him feel like he could breathe again. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The days in Seabrook Bay passed slowly, each one blending into the next in a way that felt comforting to Ethan. He found himself returning to Seabrook Suites every morning, always greeted by Sarah's warm smile and a steaming cup of coffee. At first, he told himself it was just the coffee that kept him coming back, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. Sarah had a way of making people feel at ease. She was quick with a joke, always ready to listen, and her laugh, soft and genuine, had a way of cutting through the noise in Ethan's mind. Over time, their conversations grew longer, more personal. Ethan learned that Sarah had taken over the cafe after her parents passed away, using it to support herself and her younger sister Lily. She spoke about Lily with a mix of pride and worry, her love for her sister evident in every word. "She's got big dreams," Sarah said one afternoon, wiping her hands on her apron as she sat across from Ethan during a rare quiet moment. "Wants to be a fashion designer. She's always sketching dresses and outfits in her notebooks. I just hope I can give her the chance to make those dreams come true." Ethan nodded, his chest tightening. He admired Sarah's strength, her determination to keep going despite everything she'd been through. It was a stark contrast to his own life, where he had always relied on his family's wealth to shield him from hardship. "What about you?" Sarah asked, tilting her head as she studied him. "What brought you to Seabrook Bay?" Ethan hesitated, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup. He had been careful not to reveal too much about himself, afraid that the truth would shatter the fragile peace he had found here. "I just needed a change," he said finally, keeping his tone light. "City life wasn't for me." Sarah raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but she didn't press him. "Well, whatever the reason, I'm glad you're here," she said with a smile. As the weeks went by, Ethan became more involved in the rhythm of life in Seabrook Bay. He helped Sarah with small tasks around the cafe, fixed a leaky faucet in the kitchen, and even started chatting with the regulars. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something real, something that didn't revolve around money or power. But even as he settled into this new life, the weight of his past lingered in the back of his mind. He hadn't told Sarah about his family, about the arranged marriage he had fled from, or the ultimatum his father had given him. The longer he stayed, the harder it became to imagine leaving, but the thought of Sarah finding out the truth terrified him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan and Sarah walked along the beach. The waves lapped gently at the shore, and the salty breeze carried the faint scent of seaweed. "You've been quiet today," Sarah said, glancing at him. Ethan shrugged, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Just thinking." "About what?" He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "About how life can change so quickly. One moment, everything feels stable, and the next, it's like the ground's been ripped out from under you." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I know that feeling." Ethan turned to her, his curiosity piqued. "What happened?" She sighed, kicking at a pebble on the sand. "My dad, He wasn't exactly a good man. He ran a business, real estate mostly, but he cut a lot of corners, made a lot of enemies. When he died, he left behind a mess. Lawsuits, debts, a reputation that still follows me and Lily everywhere we go. Ethan frowned, his heart aching for her. "That's not your fault." "I know," she said softly, "but it doesn't make it any easier. Sometimes I think about selling this place, taking the money and starting over somewhere new. But then I think about Lily, about how much she loves it here, and I can't do it. This is her home." Ethan nodded, understanding more than he wanted to admit. He had spent his whole life running from his family's expectations, but Sarah had stayed and faced hers head on. It made him admire her even more. That night, as Ethan lay in the small room he had rented above the cafe, he couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. She was everything he wasn't: strong, selfless, unafraid to fight for the people she loved. But the more he thought about her, the more the guilt gnawed at him. She deserved someone who could be honest with her, someone who didn't carry the kind of baggage he did. Ethan stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He had come to Seabrook Bay to escape, but now he was starting to wonder if he had found something worth staying for. The peaceful rhythm of Seabrook Bay was shattered one afternoon when Ethan walked into Seabrook Suites and saw Sarah standing behind the counter, her face pale and her hands trembling. She was holding a letter, the edges crumpled from how tightly she was gripping it. "Sarah?" Ethan asked, his voice laced with concern. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes wide with a mix of fear and frustration. "It's from my dad's lawyer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're calling a meeting about his estate. Apparently there's more money left than I thought. But there are conditions." Ethan frowned, stepping closer. "What kind of conditions?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "The kind that ties me to his name forever? If I accept the money, I have to take over his old company. I'd be responsible for everything he left behind, his debts, his reputation, all of it." Ethan's chest tightened as he watched her struggle with the weight of the decision. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay, but he knew better than anyone that some choices didn't have easy answers. "Ted, what are you going to do?" he asked gently. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "The money could change everything for Lily and me. I could send her to college, give her the life she deserves. But I don't want to be tied to him. I don't want to carry his mistakes." Ethan reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to decide right now," he said softly. "Take some time to think about it." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thanks, Ethan. I feel so trapped." Later that evening, as Ethan walked along the beach, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out, his heart sinking when he saw the name on the screen. Morgan Carter. He hadn't spoken to his father since the night he left, but he knew this moment would come eventually. Taking a deep breath, he answered the call. "Ethan?" Morgan's voice was sharp, cutting through the sound of the waves. "I've been patient, but enough is enough. It's time for you to come home." Ethan clenched his jaw, his free hand curling into a fist. "I'm not coming back, Dad." "You don't have a choice," Morgan snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? To a reputation? People are asking questions, Ethan. They're wondering why my son is hiding in some backwater town instead of stepping up like a man." "I'm not hiding," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside him. "I'm living my life. For once, I'm doing what I want, not what you want." Morgan's laugh was cold and humorless. "And what exactly is that? Playing house in some nowhere town? Drinking coffee and fixing leaky faucets? You're better than this, Ethan." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "Maybe I don't want to be better. Maybe I just want to be happy." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Morgan spoke again, his tone low and dangerous. "If you don't come back, you're done. No money, no inheritance, nothing." Ethan closed his eyes, the weight of his father's words pressing down on him. He had known this was coming. but hearing it out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. "Fine," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't need your money. I don't need anything from you." He ended the call before his father could respond, his hands shaking as he shoved the phone back into his pocket. The next morning, Ethan walked into the cafe, his mind still reeling from the conversation with his father. He found Sarah sitting at one of the tables, staring blankly at the letter from her dad's lawyer. "Hey," he said softly, sliding into the seat across from her. She looked up, offering him a weak smile. "Hey!" For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of their respective struggles hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Do you ever feel like no matter what you do, it's never enough?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, his throat tightening. "Yeah, I feel that way all the time." Sarah studied him, her brow furrowing. "You've never really told me why you came here," she said. "What are you running from, Ethan?" Ethan froze, his heart pounding. He had been so careful to avoid this conversation, but now, looking into Sarah's eyes, he realized he couldn't keep lying to her. I left my family," he admitted, his voice trembling. "They wanted me to marry someone I didn't love, someone who could help their business. When I said no, they gave me an ultimatum: do what they want or lose everything." Sarah's eyes widened, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. "So you chose to leave," she said finally. Ethan nodded, his chest tightening. "I couldn't do it, Sarah. I couldn't live my life for them anymore. But now, I don't know if I made the right choice." Sarah reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "You did," she said firmly. "You chose yourself, Ethan. That's not something to regret." Ethan looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he wasn't alone. But even as Sarah's words comforted him, a new fear crept into his mind. What would she think of him if she knew the full truth? If she knew just how much he had left behind, and how much he still stood to lose? The tension between Ethan and Sarah lingered in the air over the next few days. Ethan could feel it every time their eyes met, an unspoken question hanging between them. Sarah hadn't pressed him for more details about his past, but he knew it was only a matter of time before she did. And when that moment came, he wasn't sure if she'd still look at him the same way. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan found Sarah sitting on the back porch of the cafe. She was staring out at the ocean, her knees pulled to her chest, the letter from her father's lawyer crumpled in her hand. "Hey," he said softly, stepping onto the porch. She glanced up at him, her expression weary. "Hey." Ethan hesitated before sitting down beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the sound of the waves filling the silence. "I need to tell you something," Ethan said finally, his voice low. Sarah turned to him, her brow furrowing. "Okay." He took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists on his lap. "I haven't been completely honest with you about why I came here." Sarah's expression didn't change, but he could see the flicker of curiosity and maybe a little fear in her eyes. "I told you my family wanted me to marry someone for business reasons," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "But what I didn't tell you is, my family is wealthy, like ridiculously wealthy. My dad runs one of the largest shipping companies in the country, and the woman they wanted me to marry, she's the daughter of one of his biggest business partners." Sarah blinked, her lips parting slightly in surprise. "So you're rich?" Not anymore," Ethan said quickly, shaking his head. "When I refused to go through with the marriage, my dad cut me off. No money, no inheritance, nothing. That's why I came here. I needed to get away from all of it." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" she asked finally, her voice soft. "I was scared," Ethan admitted. "I didn't want you to see me the way everyone else does, as some spoiled rich kid who ran away from his problems. I wanted you to see me for who I really am." Sarah turned to him, her eyes searching his. "And who are you, Ethan?" He swallowed hard, his chest tightening. "I don't know," he said honestly. but I'm trying to figure it out. And being here with you, it's the first time in a long time that I've felt like I'm on the right path." Sarah's expression softened, and she reached out, placing a hand on his. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "I know that wasn't easy." Ethan let out a shaky breath, relief washing over him. "So, you're not mad?" "No," Sarah said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "But I do think you need to stop running. From your family, from your past, from everything. You can't keep hiding forever, Ethan." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, but he knew she was right. He had spent his whole life running from his parents' expectations, from his responsibilities, from himself. It was time to stop. The next morning, Sarah made her own decision. She called the lawyer and agreed to attend the meeting about her father's estate. Ethan offered to go with her, but she shook her head. "This is something I need to do on my own," she said firmly. Ethan watched her leave, his heart heavy with worry. He knew how much this decision weighed on her, and he hated that he couldn't do more to help. Hours later, Sarah returned, her expression unreadable. Ethan stood as she walked into the cafe, his heart pounding. "Well?" he asked nervously. Sarah let out a long breath, a small smile breaking across her face. "I did it," she said. "I accepted the money, but only under my terms. I'm using part of it to set up a scholarship fund for kids in Seabrook Bay. And the rest, well, let's just say Lily's going to have a lot of opportunities." Ethan's chest swelled with pride. "That's amazing, Sarah." She shrugged, her smile growing. "It feels good, like I'm finally taking control of my life." Ethan nodded, his own resolve hardening. "I think it's time I did the same." That evening, Ethan made a call to his father. Morgan answered on the first ring, his voice cold and sharp. "Ethan," he said, "I assume you've come to your senses." "No," Ethan said firmly. "I'm not coming back. I just wanted to tell you that I'm done. Done with the business, done with the expectations, done with all of it. I'm staying here, in Seabrook Bay, and I'm going to build a life for myself, on my own terms." Morgan was silent for a long moment before letting out a bitter laugh. "You're making a mistake, Ethan." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but it's my mistake to make." He ended the call, his heart pounding. For the first time in his life, he felt free. The morning air in Seabrook Bay was crisp and filled with the scent of salt and freshly baked bread. Ethan stood outside the cafe, watching as Sarah hung a new sign above the door. It read, "Seabrook Sweets and Stays." The cafe had expanded, now doubling as a small bed and breakfast. The upstairs rooms, once unused and dusty, had been transformed into cozy guest spaces with ocean views. It had been Sarah's idea, but Ethan had thrown himself into the project, helping with renovations and repairs. "Looks good," Ethan said, stepping back to admire the sign. Sarah turned to him, her face glowing with pride. "It does, doesn't it?" Lily appeared in the doorway, holding a tray of muffins. "I still think we should have called it Lily's Place," she teased, grinning. Sarah rolled her eyes, laughing. "Maybe next time." Ethan smiled, watching the two sisters banter. Lily had blossomed in the past few weeks, her sketches now pinned up on the cafe walls for customers to admire. With the money from their father's estate, Sarah had been able to enroll Lily in an online design program, giving her the chance to pursue her dream of becoming a fashion designer. As the first guests arrived, a young couple with a toddler in tow, Ethan and Sarah worked seamlessly together, welcoming them and showing them to their room. It was a far cry from the life Ethan had left behind, but it felt right. That evening, as the sun set over the bay, Ethan and Sarah sat on the beach, their feet buried in the cool sand. The waves lapped gently at the shore, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. "I never thought I'd end up here," Ethan said, his voice soft. Sarah glanced at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "Neither did I, but I'm glad you did." Ethan turned to her, his heart swelling with gratitude. You've changed my life, Sarah. You and this town. You've given me something I didn't even know I was looking for." Sarah reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "You've changed mine too, Ethan. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." Ethan smiled, leaning in to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Me too." As they sat there, watching the waves roll in, Ethan felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He had found his place, his purpose, and the person he wanted to share it all with. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running, he was home. Thank you for watching this story on Emma's Stories. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales about life, love, and resilience. What would you have done if you were in Ethan or Sarah's shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. See you in the next one.